This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety.
Good morning, Ethan.
I am not Ethan.
You are not.
No.
Good morning, Kayla.
Good morning.
Why are you here today? And where's Ethan?
Well, Ethan decided to have a baby, and so he is spending time with his wife and his newborn baby. So obviously very excited for them, but missing him at work.
Right. Now you know how much work he actually does.
Very true. Very true. Yes.
And why I say that is because Kayla's the boss lady. we had to recruit her to come keep me in line, in check.
Yeah, now I get to be on the podcast and edit it. So that's very fun.
It is very helpful because then you'll know right away. Oops.
Yep. Yeah.
So fantastic. All right. So what are we talking about today?
I don't know, Kelly. You tell me. What are we talking about today?
Well, the last couple of blogs and podcasts that we did was really setting everybody up for success. Get all the schedules done, all the plans done, make sure all of your policies were in place, your enhancements and improvements to based upon what you learned last year are in place, and people are set to train on those new changes and so forth, because we're going to start opening up schools. And in fact, some places, like in my area, we've already opened up our schools. So that's what we were talking about the last couple of blogs and podcasts. And so now there's other things that need to be done, because we really have to start doing some of those things in the month of August before we start opening the doors to both staff and students. So that's kind of what we're going to talk a little bit about right now, how the safety teams and I call them threat and behavior assessment intervention teams, TBAITs. You can call them whatever you want, obviously, but getting those teams up and running, because that really is more of direct responsibility for those safety directors and safety coordinators within the districts.
Okay, Kelly. So tell us, what does that all entail as far as the safety teams go?
So really, the safety coordinators and those directors of safety for the districts, whatever you call them, they're the people who are responsible for making sure that your schools and the districts are safe and your students and staff are safe, right? And generally speaking, we have safety teams. If you don't go back to our blogs and podcasts regarding the building of those teams, but now is the time where you start really bringing those teams together and setting down those expectations and so forth. And just to go over real quick, there's 2 or 3 different levels of both the safety teams and the threat and behavior assessment intervention teams. And you typically have a district level team, and they're responsible for making sure policies are met, standards are met, expectations are met, everyone understands their responsibilities, their roles, and those types of things. Additionally, the district level team is responsible for support to the building level teams that we'll talk about in just a second. But when we're talking about district level, it's really the integrity keepers, the gatekeepers for our teams, and making sure that everything is being done correctly and making sure that everyone understands what they're supposed to be doing. So we establish those district level teams, and you should have building level input from on that team so that they can communicate, concerns, problems, challenges, obstacles, and you can help work through that. But some of the other support is, especially in the threat and behavior assessments, is oftentimes the building level teams face some pretty significant complex problems, issues, and obstacles. And it's the job of the district level team to kind of help navigate those and work through those.
So a quick question for you. So just kind of going back to the blog that just recently went out this week, we're talking about the safety teams, but then also talking about the threat and behavioral assessment intervention teams. And just looking at this, the people that are responsible as far as like the chair leads, the members, and that support team, a lot of those titles of these people, they overlap. So these people are essentially in charge of both the safety team as well as the threat and behavioral assessment?
Can be, oftentimes, because of you don't hire people specifically to be on a threat behavior assessment team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with the exception of maybe one or two people, you don't hire people to be on a safety team. So this is where we have same people that are occupying different roles. So generally speaking, as an example, within the school structure, you have your principals who are responsible for everything that happens on their campus. So when you start developing safety teams and threat behavior assessment intervention teams, then they're responsible for that. They can delegate that task to somebody else.
Yeah.
So if you read the blogs, we have like principals, assistant principals, counselors, and so forth in them. And we can go over membership in a little bit if you wish. But there's only so many people that have that ability to dedicate as part of their regular duties time to these teams. And based upon their day-to-day role, they're the perfect choice for these teams. It's just, what are they doing during that time, right? Are they looking at safety issues? Are they looking at training, running drills, running exercises, that thing, versus doing an assessment on as a result of a concern that's been communicated to them?
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense.
So if we want to talk about, the district level members, so this is one thing that we should caution people about. We need to be inclusive with our teams, but don't make them so large that they can't be managed. So, and the reason I say that is, generally speaking, in the small to medium sized school district, the number of buildings can range drastically from 1 or 2 to 20 or 30, right? While you want input from all of those people because they're all going to have a different perspective, there might be need to have regional teams, right? So because they might face different challenges, maybe different demographics, different environments. We have some districts that have urban schools, suburban schools, and rural schools, especially in the Southeast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they encompass entire counties. So all of those regions and the type of schools they all have to abide by the same guidelines from the district, but they're applied differently based upon the circumstances. So, but we're talking about at the district level, you're either going to have, as the chair lead, you're either going to have an assistant superintendent who's the lead on that, the director of safety or the safety coordinator. Generally speaking, members, generally speaking, what you want is the chairperson from each team at each building, because that's going to be your communications conduit, where you as a district team decide on what those parameters are, what the expectations are, roles, responsibilities, communicate any changes in policies or procedures and those types of things. You probably want to have a communications director on that team as well, because when you have an incident in regards to the safety or even a threat assessment type situation, you want your communications director to understand what's acceptable to say and what is not. And because that's where the parents and the community are going to get their information from. So it's good to have your communications director on board there. And then I generally list 3 levels of membership support, participation in these teams. The chair, the person who is responsible to direct. The members, those are the people who come in and provide the information, discuss, and everyone comes together as a team for a solution. And then the support level. Now, the support level are, generally speaking, if you have a specific incident or a problem or obstacle that needs to be navigated or solved, then they're the ones that provide that support. And when you're first developing your teams and you're first trying to get things running smoothly, they're going to provide some support, some resources, some perspective on your solutions. And these are people that have specialties like mental health services, your law enforcement people, your fire and medical services people, those types of. And sometimes in many states, they might have the district attorney's office who have victim witness advocates. They might provide some perspective there as well. So bringing all these people, you may need them in for the first couple of meetings to make sure everyone's on the same sheet of music at the beginning of the year, but then they might not need to come to every meeting, because meetings that you should have, from my perspective, a minimum once a month, are to deal with current problems. What's happening? We're seeing this. We're having issues with this piece of equipment. What do we do? That kind of stuff. So that's the membership, and really working with a purpose of communicating things down to the building level teams. Now, if we start looking at moving it down to the building level from the district office level, they're going to implement everything that was generated and discussed and agreed upon from the district level. But they're going to only apply it to their environment, their school. And so it's the responsibility of the chair to bring that perspective down to the building level. And when we start talking about, especially the safety teams, they're at the building level, they're the ones that ensure the end user. What I mean by that is the teachers, all your staff, the students, all adhere to the standards that were and expectations that were established by the district team. And so, again, likely going to have the principal who is the chair. That principal may or may not delegate that task to the assistant principal, or maybe somebody who has some other staff member who has a propensity for this kind of work. But generally, it'll be an assistant principal. And the members can be really, I put some titles in here: assistant principal, deans, counselor, lead teachers, those types of people. But it really is more important that you get the right person in there than the title. A lot of districts are very strict on the title. This is part of your function, so have those people on there. But you really need to have people who really embrace the function of the team, the safety, the security, all of that stuff, so that they can help drive good conversations. They can ask good questions. They can identify obstacles, challenges, those types of things. And it's more important that you have the right people on the team than you have specific people by title.
So obviously there are certain things that principals can designate to whoever they want to, but other things that they can't. So how is that differentiated?
So it's a liability issue, right? When it really comes down to what a principal can and cannot delegate. So they can delegate a task, something that needs to be done, like you need to be the chair of the safety committee. They can't shift the responsibility and the liability to the chairperson. They have a legal obligation, the principals do, a legal and in some cases a moral obligation to make sure that the safety team is doing what they're supposed to do and that they are successful. So in a lot of what the school districts do is they delegate and forget.
Hmm.
They just say, okay, that's the assistant principal's job, and they let them do it. Because oftentimes there's trust there that the assistant principal will get it done correctly according to industry standards and educational industry standards, right? So there's not a lot of oversight. That's a completely different story when we're talking about security, safety, threat, and behavior assessments.
Can those tasks be designated to like the members or the support team of that building level team?
So there's a difference. Good question. They can be delegated to anybody.
Got it.
Right? You want to delegate it to somebody who you think can handle that, can accomplish the training, who can serve in that capacity. You can delegate it to anybody, right?
Yeah.
The task, not the responsibility and the liability.
Got it.
The principal by nature of their job and by the nature of the culture of their job. So the day-to-day culture designates liability within the school. So if on a regular basis, almost every decision has to be made by the principal. Obviously, that's not everyone, but there's quite a few decisions that could and probably should be made at a lower level that people are expected to get the approval of the principal. As an example, in many school districts, it's a policy. If it's not a policy, it's a long-lived practice that teachers do not dial 911 without first getting the principal on board and approval from the principal. In many cases, they call the principal before they call 911. And there's probably reasons for that, but we have teachers out there that should understand when and how and why they need to call 911 versus asking for advice from a principal. But if that's your culture and you don't train your staff on how and when to dial 911 to get emergency help, then that causes some issues. And if you now expect every time that you have an issue for the principal to make those decisions, then you're going to have some issues, right? So if you expect your people to call you before you make decisions, then you should understand what's going on with your safety team and your school safety so that you can actually make those decisions. So if they do something that is outside and you can't just say, well, I didn't know they were going to do that. That doesn't relieve you of your responsibility and your liability for them doing it. So you need to understand as a principal what they are doing.
Sure. Yep. So obviously we've just been focusing on, the safety team. And I mentioned before that the threat and behavioral assessment intervention team also has some of those same leaders within there that have the same responsibilities. So why do we have two teams?
Very good question. Because the overall function of what they're trying to accomplish is somewhat parallel but different, right? They run, ultimately what we're trying to do is make schools safer. And in the safety team, we're looking at the overall safety and what we need to do to keep our schools safe. So we're talking about all these different systems, alerting systems, management systems, access management, visitor management, surveillance, locks, doors, training, all of these things to keep our schools safe. But then we look at the different functionalities of keeping people safe. And we've talked about this quite a bit, about the 4 phases or 4 stages of emergency response and preparedness, right? So that's the prevention and mitigation, the preparation, the response, and the recovery, right? So now we start looking at how do we really implement and put into practice all 4 of those phases. And what we're looking at with the safety team is making sure everything is covered from a high altitude perspective. And we're looking at all of these different systems and how do we get them to work together. And that requires a team of people to do that. Could we make all these different teams? Yes. Could we make a safety team? Yes. Out of that, could we make a training team? Yes, and we probably should. But those are like little committees in there. Now, when we start talking about threat and behavior assessment and intervention teams, what we're really talking about is a special team that has the primary purpose of intervening based upon an assessment in a student's behavior to prevent something violent from happening. And that takes a special group of people. Oftentimes they're already within your schools. Sometimes it doesn't. They're not there. And what we have to look at is the unique functionality of this team. And their focus is not just safety, but it's the prevention and mitigation of a violent threat. And it takes specific training for that. And it takes specific expertise and functionality. So you have to separate the 2 teams so that when a threat assessment is being conducted or a behavior assessment is being conducted, that they understand what their focus is and they get the training that they need and they understand why they need that. So we're looking within our schools to see who's available and who are the best people. And oftentimes they're the best people on both teams: counselors, mental health, assistant principals, deans, those types of people, because they're the ones that are there and they are the ones that are observing. They're not teaching a class. They're not, they don't have these other responsibilities generally to take care of a group of kids during an emergency. So take what you have, understand that they need training in a specific functionality and that they have a specific focus and responsibility. And so that's the primary difference. Is we have the safety team that really is addressing the overall picture, and the threat and behavior assessment intervention team, that team is a group of people who are specifically looking at the prevention of violence.
Got it. And then with that threat and behavioral assessment intervention team, we still have the 2 different levels where you're looking at more of the district level team as well as the building level teams.
Yes, and the reason for that is pretty simple, but it's complicated in the same sentence there, right? If that's a thing. So the reason we have a building level team, there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that's likely where the first threat identification is going to come from. The identification of that threat, that's where it's going to come from. That's also where all of these red flags that we've been talking about, and the importance of identifying red flags, concerning behaviors is what I'm talking about with red flags, and warning signs. That's where they're going to be observed. So they're your first responders to threat assessments and concerning behaviors, and how they intervene, how they do those assessments to determine the level of concern and potential there is going to be recognized first at the site level, the building level. The other aspect of that is the people who are exhibiting these concerning behaviors and threats, they're likely known by the building staff. How many times have we heard after an incident and we've identified who that person was? Let's say little Billy. It was Billy who committed this atrocious act of violence on our schools. And you're interviewing witnesses that said, I didn't know he was going to do it, but I'm not surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there's this understanding that it could be this, but they have that understanding and this understanding of that potential because they're dealing with Billy every day.
Sure.
Right. So having that basis for that first receipt of the report or self-identifying that, hey, Billy's struggling and we need to have some intervention here, whatever that means to you and based upon those circumstances, that comes from the building level, the school level. The issue, and again, the reason you have a district level or in the larger districts, you might have regional levels based upon the number of schools and the concept of span of control that we've talked about. Span of control is how many people, how many groups can you actively engage with and still have some control over them. Oftentimes, what you find and what you are reporting and discovering at the building level requires too many resources for you to deal with. Sometimes there's notification requirements. Sometimes there's requirements that if you need additional resources, you have to request them and go through a certain channel to get them for your school. So you need a team at the district level or regional level, like I said, that can help you with that. First of all, just like the safety team, they're going to set policies, they're going to set procedures, expectations, roles, responsibilities, what needs to be completed in a threat and behavior assessment and what you should do with that. That's going to be determined at the district level. It's going to be pushed down to all the building levels. But then when you get a request for a threat assessment or a behavior assessment, and you start looking at the potential for that assessment and what's the worst case scenario, like if you have a very high level threat, you're going to require a lot of resources. You're going to require a lot of notifications. So going into the district and saying, hey, this is happening. We need some help here because this is going to get ugly pretty quick. And when I say ugly, I mean complex and things could get ugly. So the sooner you bring them in, the better off you are. But then there's going to be these everyday incidences. You had a fight between Billy and Johnny, and when you look at the basis for that fight, it's not just a schoolyard incident, it's something a little bit more. And you could see maybe Billy's behavior, violence behavior, coping skills, all of these things elevating to a point where, there's some potential for Billy to crack or whatever. And now we need to get him maybe placed in a facility.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we touched on in the last podcast, where it's really starting that intervention at that early stage versus waiting, because you can't just go, well, oh yeah, I could have seen that, based off of the way that he had been acting in school. But it's really taking the initiative to get that intervention started early.
And we talked about how early is early, right? Never too early.
Yeah.
Right? It's never too early to say, hey, Billy, what's going on? Let's figure this out early and help him early when we have a chance. I've had conversations as recently as Wednesday this past week. As you know, you and I went to watch some training in Minnesota, and we were fortunate enough to be there with some partners and working through some future features that we're going to have and we're all excited about. Stay tuned for those because that's going to be a game changer for some people.
Yes, for sure.
Unfortunately, we can't say what it is right now because it's just not ready. But when we start talking about behavior and threat intervention, that starts as early as kindergarten, because kids are being traumatized, and there are some, natural behavior issues that would be identifiable that might indicate that a child early on may be susceptible to violence, and maybe have this propensity, I guess is the word I'm looking for violence early on. And how do we deal with that? Right. And so it's never too early to intervene and say, hey, what's going on? What's happening? Let's talk about it. Let's fix this. Whatever that looks like to you guys. But yeah, and then trying to manage that case. That's what this threat assessment behavior, that's what it really is trying to identify who those kids are that would have a propensity for violence as a solution to their issues, and trying to manage those children as they matriculate through their academic career and so forth. So it's important that we do that early and often, but sometimes we just don't see it, or we don't realize the potential there. And that's where we need the help of our families, our students, our staff. And that's where the, anonymous reporting comes in. That is so crucial to this identification, early identification. And, unfortunately, we start looking, most of the time, we put all of our resources into creating threat assessment teams, behavior intervention teams at the high school level. And
it's too late.
Then it's too late, or it's much more difficult. Let's add that, right?
Yep.
It may not be too late, but it may be much more difficult to change somebody's pathway in the high school level than it would be at the elementary school level.
Sure. Yeah.
If we start looking early and managing early, then it may require far less resources in the end, right? So, I mean, there's not one person out there that doesn't want to make our school safer.
Right.
Right. And, people are going to say, well, what about the shooter? Okay, I get it. But generally speaking, everyone wants our school safer. And that takes effort, that takes community, and we need to focus it in the right areas, the right time, and bring it all together. So it's going to, we talked about Left a Bang quite a bit this week with our school partners and our technology partners, Left and Bang, and what that means. And when we start looking at that, that's something that we really should be understanding better. And I didn't tell you this, Kayla, but I was walking through the airport yesterday on my way back from Minnesota in Chicago, and I started noticing through my adventure, my travels from one end of the Chicago airport to the other, there were all these people wearing these shirts that was, I forget the name of the organization itself, but it's meant for advocating for responsible gun ownership to help stop the violence, right? And so what do you think Kelly did?
Well, I mean, you went up and talked to them, that's for sure.
I did. So I mean, this creepy old guy said, hey, are you guys having some sort of convention? I'm seeing a lot of these shirts around. And they said, oh, yeah. And so we started talking. And one of their concerns was, their biggest issue is they get this thought that they're trying to eliminate guns, right? And that's not really what they're trying to do. What they're trying to advocate for is responsible gun ownership, locking them up, making sure people know how to store and maintain a firearm safely.
Yeah.
Noble cause. But there are two things that were out of that 5-10 minute conversation that I got out of it. First of all, early intervention is key to stopping this violence.
Yeah.
And the second one is stop worrying about the politics. This is an issue that can be solved if we stop dealing with politics, where schools are afraid of the politics that are being created by having good, solid conversations. So because they're afraid of the politics, they elect not to have necessary conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's solving the issue.
Right. And if we're not going to have good heart to heart, in your face conversations without getting people's feelings hurt and, so forth, then we're never going to solve this problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, we say all the time that safety is a shared responsibility. And that's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, is bringing these teams together and really making sure that they're ready to start the year off and making sure that they're prepared and trained for the school year ahead, but focusing more on, like what does the school need to be doing before those school doors open and making sure that their systems and everything work and they're just ready for the students and staff to be there for the school year.
Yeah. So there's a reason I let off with the teams, right? Because having the teams also is a force multiplier for everybody. As a former school safety coordinator, I was a team of one. So in order for me to get all of the things I needed done, I needed to recruit other people. And one way that is done is creating your safety teams and your threat and behavior assessment teams to accomplish those things for you, right? Use those teams to help you implement and make sure everything is working. That's part of their job. Make sure that the doors open when they're supposed to. And just as important, if not more so, that they close and lock when they're supposed to, right? So what we're talking about right now is identifying what your security and safety assets are and making sure that they all work. That when you walk through the front door and you scan your badge or whatever it is that you do to get there, that is working correctly, that all your video cameras are working. If you have shot and gun detection, run a test. Bring your law enforcement in and let's run a test to see if that works and make sure it does work. And if it works correctly, is it integrated to where it can send an alert to you or to a system or to everybody, right? We get back to left a bang. And if you have somebody who's shooting at the school and nobody knows what that is, then maybe we have a sensor, a shot detection or a gun detection or both, right? And can we get people alerted quicker without having this delayed response? What was that? I don't think that was a gun. I think that was a firecracker. Oh, really? Why do you think a firecracker is going off in the front of your building at 8:00 in the morning?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So let's take that out of their hands. Let's get that going so that when there's a shot detected, that something happens. There's not this thought process that has to go. If a gun is spotted, that the gun is identified. We don't have to look at, oh, what was that? Oh, that was a prop for a play. No, it's not a prop for a play. Worst case scenario is if it is, and you go talk to little Johnny who's carrying this prop, it is actually a prop, but at least you can figure out what it is, right? You can buy time there and create those time barriers and allow for people to start moving. So really working through all of your systems, making sure your first aid kits are up and running and your AEDs are charged and ready to go. They have their pads and leads are not expired, that type of thing, making sure that things are going to work when you need them. Right. And so I talk about safety assets, and many people say, well, what is an asset? Right. And how do you inspect all of those and so forth? So this is an issue for us, right? Because we have so many things to manage, and safety assets are one of those. And what is a safety asset? So what do I have to monitor and inspect? And I can't tell you what you have that needs to be monitored and inspected. I can tell you that everything that you need to monitor and inspect and or has an expiration date is a safety asset that needs to be monitored and inspected. And I know I just went around in a circle there and I came back, right? But in my mind, world according to Kelly, anything that is safety related, security related, that requires an inspection and or has an expiration date is a safety asset.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example. Texas has specific dates on when you need to do a security assessment. You need to walk through your building, check every door prior to summer or during the summer, prior to your doors opening for school. After school opens, you need to check every door weekly, and you need to report that. So how do you do that? And are those safety assets? Absolutely. Your doors are safety assets. They're a barrier that prevent or delay or add time to the response to an active violence situation, right? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about all of those things. Now, it's easy to say your first aid kits need to be inspected once a year or twice a year or whatever, right? They might expire every 3 years. So you have an expiration of 3 years, but you still want them to be inspected regularly to make sure that they're fully stocked and they have what you need and what your state requires or recommends. AEDs are the same way. You might have a 5-year expiration date, but you need to inspect them every month to make sure that they work. Because you don't want that situation where you have somebody who has a heart attack right in front of an AED and you go to pull that AED out and you hook it up and the battery's dead. That's not good for you or them, right? But other things that are not so readily identifiable of assets are your training cycles. At least once a year, you should be training all of your staff on what to do during an emergency. So those emergency protective actions. And they should be, I'm using air quotes here, certified, which means they successfully went through their training that you require at least once a year. And if they're not, and you're not going over those plans, you're not communicating those plans, you're not communicating your expectations, and you're not identifying what their roles and responsibilities are, and something gets messed up there, then it's not going to look good for you or them. So that's an asset. Your people are an asset and they need to be trained. They need to make sure that they are regularly exercised and drilled so they understand. And you have to keep track of that. Everyone, every single person. You know, I literally had this situation happen to me when I was a safety coordinator, that when we did announced drills, I told our school districts what they were going to do each month. I left it up to them when they did it. And I don't want to surprise teachers unless they're super high functioning, and they're going to function very high with unannounced, which is rare in my experience. But I want them to learn. I want this to be a teaching moment. I want them to be trained so that there's no stress. When there's stress involved, it's much more difficult to train. And so I want to reduce that. But I had teachers that called in sick every day that there was a drill. Unfortunately, according to Murphy's Law, they're the ones that are going to be most impacted during an actual emergency. So if you notice that you have staff that are doing that, you need to pull them in and you need to train them, even if it's individually. So they're assets. They need to be certified. somebody needs to talk to them about their practice of not participating in the drills, and they need to correct that. However that's done in the school system. But they're an asset. Make sure everyone's trained.
So the bottom line basically is that we should be creating a checklist and making sure that we do these on a daily, weekly basis, depending on what those assets are, and when those expiration dates are, etc. But is there anything else that we should be doing prior to the school year?
Yeah, so there are some things, right? But we'll talk about those in our next blog. There's and podcast. It's what do you do prior to? But like you said, checklist. Make sure everything is working. If it's not working, this is your last opportunity to get it fixed, and before school opens. If not, then you're going to have to deal with contractors coming in and tearing apart door locks and things like that. So do what you can now. Check those things off, make sure they're noted somewhere. So if there is a problem, you can say, look, I started fixing this and it just didn't get there, but it was identified as a problem. And now we're trying to correct that problem. But as we get closer and closer to those doors opening, then we got to start shifting to understanding all of the efforts that we've put into this, setting ourselves up for success, training all of our teachers, managing all of our assets, managing our teams. All of that stuff is in place. Now we're really going to put all of that into practice when that first lock gets opened up. And we'll talk more about this in the next blog and podcast, because the next series is day one of school, right? What do you do day one? Where are you? What are you doing? Are you visible? Are you checking with people? Those types of things, right? And we'll look through that. But right now, polish up, refine what you need to do, correct any issues that you see. We're under the gun now because we're starting to get back into the school swing of things. And we're getting real close to opening that lockup. And when we do that, game's on. And we're going to have to really step it up to make sure that everyone is good, make sure we're looking at the anxiety of the teachers, especially new ones or new administrators, when it relates to school safety. And then we're going to start now looking at getting into that routine of setting up our meetings. What are we talking about in our meetings? What are we doing? Are we doing exercises? Those types of things. So we got a lot to talk about in the next editions of our blogs and podcasts. So stay tuned for that. And if you need more information about the teams themselves and the structure and what the expectations are, go back and look at the podcasts and the blogs that we did on those. Yeah, we're ready. Let's go. You should be ready.
Start the school year off strong.
Right? Safety. Address them early and often.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.